Well, we're joined today by David Goldblatt, author of the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year Award, The Game of Our Lives. But more importantly, he's a Bristol Rovers supporter. David, welcome to Memorial Stadium, a familiar place to you, I guess. But can we talk about your book, first of all? And you must be delighted to have won such an accolade.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. You know, you spend a lot of time looking at four walls in your screen and not getting out much. And validation is fantastic in any walk of life and any part of one's life. I mean, it's particularly pleasing to win the William Hill for, I think, two reasons. One, the award itself has become prestigious because it's contributed so much to developing the quality and the breadth of sports writing in this country, which, 30 years ago, before the William Hill, was in a pretty parlous state. And now it's a very rich field, and you can see that from the other shortlisted books this year, which were all in and of themselves really good and really interesting books. So to be the first amongst equals in a field like that, you've got to feel nice. I think so it's nice, and it's a nice prize too. So I'm really, really pleased.
What gave you the idea for the book initially?
Well, I'd already written a book called The Ball is Round, A Global History of Football, which is like this mad 1,000-page biblical epic that is a social, political, cultural history of world football. A couple of years after I'd written it, my editor at Penguin, who I'd worked on it with, called Tony Lacey, sort of threw a bit of a gauntlet down to me and said, "Oh, you bloody lefties. You always write about everywhere else. Why don't you write about home?" And he pricked some sort of bit of my conscience. And I did think it's time to kind of turn your eye to home. You can only look out for so long, and you've got to kind of, look at where you come from. And that sometimes, it's a harder thing, is kind of to really look your own society sort of like in the eye. But once I'd kind of got on that track, I couldn't stop.
So what do you feel your main findings are? The way the game has changed, in one of the reviews it said in the post-Thatcher era. What about before the Thatcher era?
Well, if you want to try and condense what the book's about, there are two sort of big statements, I suppose. The first is to say, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, football was popular, football was important, but its social status, its social reach, its social significance, it's the meanings associated with it, the people who hold them, now is out of all proportion to anything that's gone before. So, what does that tell us? I mean, football is, the equivalent of both, theatre. I mean, it sells more tickets now than the theatre industry. In terms of gathering people together in a ritual collective fashion, it's pretty close to the Church of England, and nobody's rushing home to get the Church of England highlights on a Saturday night either. It's particularly for men, it's the equivalent of the whole of soap opera, frankly, let alone its kind of economic ramifications. So, how did that happen? What does that mean? What does that mean when, this becomes that important to us? And if in terms of the sort of changes that have accompanied that, I'd say football is a social democratic game in a neoliberal world. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean that football, English football culture, was born of industrial working class England. I mean, it was always, more than that, but that was the heartland. Culturally, as well as who played it and who watched it, if not who ran it and who owned it. And that world disappeared in the 1980s, swept away. And what is left, what is left of that world? The trade union movement, is a marginal force. The Labour Party's relationship to working class England is pretty attenuated. Football has become even more significant, and it's still, in its language and demeanour, it speaks to that era. I mean, we talk about footballers putting in a shift. I mean, really? I don't think these dudes know what a shift is. I know what a shift is. You know, a shift on the line, you know, hard work. They're not putting in a shift, you know. I love it that we talk about, you know, their wages. Really, like it comes in a 10-bob note in an envelope, not through direct transfer to their bank. I mean, these guys are salaried. This is not a wage. But the language is of working class England. And the common culture of English football draws on the very best of that world, a sense of collective purpose rather than everything being about individualism, a sense of rooted place and tradition, a notion of the public good, of shared solidarities, of an acceptance that, of course, football is commercial, someone's got to pay for the circus, but that there should be limits, that should be not the only voice or thing that shapes the common culture of football. So I think, you know, the further almost like we get away from working class industrial Britain, the more football has come to sort of stand for those values. And in a way, part of the popularity of football is that it has become a long and slightly sentimental goodbye to that world. And sometimes a kind of almost reenactment of it, I think. The terrible paradox, you know, the complication, the tragedy, whatever you want to call it, is that culture and those values which continue to be so important to people are trying to survive in an increasingly commercialised and marketised football economy, you know, which often mitigates against, you know, the best of that culture. You know, and there's the struggle. That's the struggle that goes on. I mean, again, you know, someone's got to pay for the circus. I'm not a romantic, right? You know, I like watching the Champions League. I like watching professional football. People should be paid a really good wage. I don't have a problem with that. But the inequalities, injustices, and the crassness sometimes of commercialism in football are going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
So really, the traditional way of football has changed beyond recognition, hasn't it? I mean, you talk, I think, about inner city regeneration perhaps ruining the traditional game at some point. I think Rovers are an example where the city council have destroyed that network around the ground, around the club.
Rovers is a really interesting example because, you know, obviously Rovers lost Eastville back in the day, and then there was the long and terrible, you know, period in the wilderness in Twerton Park. Though something that I think, I mean, you know, thankfully that's not the situation now, but that's part of the richness of being a Rovers fan, is that there's this extraordinary, almost sort of biblical epic of being expelled, you know, and then you come back to the promised land. I mean, I really like that. That's part of the pleasure for me of being sort of connected to Rovers, is those kind of stories. I think, in a funny way, Rovers landed on their feet, though. I am a great lover of the Memorial Stadium. I think it is architecturally undistinguished. But if what you're looking for is a kind of connectedness and a soul to your kind of urban fabric, this place is fabulous.
So, but in football in general?
Well, in general, you know, it's a mixed story, isn't it? I mean, you know, Reading, for example, is a disaster. You know, they once had a great, you know, little inner city stadium, the Majetski. I mean, okay, they needed a bigger stadium, I understand that, but it's just a sort of wasteland of car parks and dual carriageways and KFCs. You know, and like, fine, someone wants to see KFC, no problem. But that can't be the be-all and end-all of the urban environment around a football ground, you know, and you have to drive. You know, again, another joy of the Memorial Stadium is you can walk. You can walk and you can enjoy being in Bristol. I mean, because that's a lot of what it's about. You know, other stadiums, I mean, you know, Arsenal's Emirates is an interesting one because they stuck in the inner city, you know, and they built big and they built new. And they did in many ways, it's a really great stadium. I mean, it's very... its commercialism is restrained, its use of public space is great, it's very accessible by public transport. But, you know, as Arsenal fans themselves will admit, they're really not singing like they used to. And that's, if we're losing that, you know, then that's like 75% of the pleasure of the thing gone.
Aren't we losing that all over the country, though, as clubs look to move out of town?
In terms of sort of noise singing atmosphere, I mean, you know, you can all see these things through rose-tinted spectacles, okay, and people misremember the past all the time. And crowds in England at their best can be absolutely sensational still, I think. I mean, I was in Newcastle in 2009 in that sort of relegation decider against, was it Middlesbrough? It was against Middlesbrough. And they had to win this game to stay up. I mean, of course, they went down in the end anyway. But it was like a wall of white noise. I actually couldn't hear myself think. I couldn't hear myself speak. It was the most electric atmosphere. I can't, you know, really sort of like surreal in it, in its levels. And you do get that, you know, and you know. But if you look at the record, if you compare, and I have done this, I've stood in crowds and sort of counted, you know, the numbers of chants and numbers of songs. You look back at the work that was done in the 70s on this, you know, you look at the decibel levels, it's clear. It's clear. We're singing less. We're bringing less banners. The singing is, you know, concentrated in smaller little blocks. It doesn't last as long. And there's a lot more silence.
Tell us about research for this book. Must have taken how long? How long was it in the making?
Well, about 2.5 years, really, I would say. I sort of really got cracking in about early 2012, and I finished it in mid-2014, I would say. So about 2 and a bit years. You know, but one brings, I kind of feel with every book that I write, you know, it's all been 30 years in the making, because you're drawing on stuff that you've been thinking about for ages. I mean, it was fun. You know, I went to a lot of football games. It was a good excuse just to go around and go to places I hadn't been before. I spent a lot of time on YouTube. I mean, I think for the modern historian, the amount of material is just unbelievable. I mean, something that I had a lot of fun writing about were mascots, and particularly when mascots have punch-ups and mascots, you know, disrupt, you know, or have an argument with the fourth official or whatever. And, you know, there's like 100 videos on YouTube you can watch, you know, and so, which is important because you kind of need to source it, and of course it's great fun to watch it. I spent a lot of time reading stuff on chat rooms, but I also read a lot of, you know, there's been a really immense growth in the quality, I think, of football journalism in the last decade. So, for example, the works of David Conn, who writes for The Guardian, previously The Independent, on particularly club ownership and the kind of battles that have happened around that, and the way the money works in modern football. I mean, it is the most extraordinary body of work. I must have read 400 of his articles. I mean, absolutely. So I sort of stand on other people's shoulders in that regard. You know, the internet, my God, you can go in all sorts of strange places. I started thinking about, you know, quite early on, I went, football and poetry. You know, there should be a kind of alliance, really. You know, there's a lot of rhythm and a lot of chanting and a lot of... So of the arts, there should be a connection. And of course, there now is a lot of, you know, we've had poet laureates being appointed at clubs. We have Andrew Motion, who was the poet laureate, writing about football. Carol Ann Duffy, the poet laureate, writing about David Beckham's metatarsals. And the extraordinary thing on, you know, one of the joys of the internet is what would have taken months and months and months to gather together, you know, including like references from... You know, I checked out basically the history of 20th century English poetry, who was talking about football, and you can do it like in a day. So it was really, I mean, it was very exciting and intellectually really engaging and a lot of fun to do that. I mean, obviously the writing itself is, you know,
It's a bit of a chore.
yeah, and then some.
Just tell me about. I know you've only recently received the award, the accolade, if you like. You said it was a prestigious award. Tell me about the surprise when it was announced that you had won.
I completely convinced myself I wasn't going to win. I thought Donald McRae's book, A Man's World, about an American boxer who was gay, would have won it. Or I even thought Andy Bull's book on bobsled, the American bobsled team, kind of Jamaican Cool Runnings, but with Harvard Blue Bloods. And the other books were all, all very good. And when they went, and the winner is game, I just... And there's there's a picture out there on the internet, not hard to find, and my eyes really are coming out on stalks, and it was fabulous. I mean, as I said to the assembled crowd, to paraphrase Alex Ferguson, sports writing, bloody hell.
Right, we move on. You are a Bristol Rovers supporter. You live in Bristol, and you can walk to the ground, as you
That's right.
made the point earlier. I mean, how did you come to be a Rovers supporter? Because you're from London originally.
So I'm a Tottenham supporter. That's my first love, inherited, as a West London Jew from my grandfather and my father, completely obsessive, between the ages of 4 and 8 in particular. But never able to go and see Tottenham because my father wouldn't go to the football from the mid-70s onwards because it all got too rough and too nasty. And Tottenham was actually particularly unpleasant in that era. And then so I'm marooned in the suburbs of London as a kind of 8-year-old, no older brother. What are you going to do? So that I never kind of really, it was always from afar. And then I moved down to Bristol in 2003. First 3 weeks in Bristol, I've got man flu from moving. I rise from my sick bed. It's a beautiful sunny day and Rovers are playing at home. And I stroll up the Gloucester Road with my friend Dan and my daughter. And I watched my first game at Rovers. And I just knew that I'd found home. I found home in Bristol and that was the right move and I wasn't going anywhere. That was like we'd hit the buffers, but in a good way. And here I am next to Rovers and this is great. And this has got something, I don't know, now I could explain what it was, but at the time I didn't sort of know. You've got to learn these things, but I could just feel it in the air. It's such a great, the views from this place are so great. And it was so obviously... this is a place where you feel like you're part of Bristol, and there aren't many places that one can sort of go and do that. I mean, that's why I really go to the football for. I go for a place, most of the time, most of the world is about me, and I am looking for a place that's about us.
So you're 10, 12 years supporting Rovers?
Yeah, I think we're in 12 years. Now. Yeah, no, I think 3 divisions.
Some highlights and some lowlights, I guess.
Well, the highlight has absolutely got to be the conference playoff at Wembley. I mean, that was just how fabulous. And we gave away the goal right at the beginning. And so it had to be misery and struggle. That was just absolutely fantastic. I had so much fun. So that's absolutely a highlight. I really like night games. Tuesday nights... when it's cold in the winter and there's sort of something at stake. I really loved the cup run when Fulham and I sat behind the dugouts. There was a lot of commentary on Roy Hodgson's hair that night. I've never heard quite so much commentary on one man's hairdo during an FA Cup. So that was great. I really enjoyed that. It was a bit hairy at times, but I enjoyed City's visit here during the Johnson's Paint Trophy, which I believe we won. So that was fun. I've enjoyed all the end of season pitch invasions. I love it that people are allowed just for a moment to go and take possession of the thing. Lows. I mean, actually going down to the conference in a way wasn't the worst. It was the 2 seasons beforehand, actually, which I felt the men was not happy. And you really were coming here thinking, it's not going to be good, it's not going to be good. And that was actually worse. It was like the going down, it was like, okay, we'll sort of start again, And actually the season in the conference, as you know, was enormously good fun. An extraordinary amount of goals. I didn't do any of the away trips, but from what I hear from those that did, how much fun to be, the best dressed chicken in town everywhere you go, So that was great. And then, of course, obviously getting promoted back was, tops it off. So all of those things have been an enormous pleasure.
And you stand on the terrace, don't you?
That's my number one choice, is the Blackthorn somewhere near pole 4 towards the front. I take a peculiar pleasure in having an obscured view, actually. I quite like it in a funny way. So that, and of course, the singing's best, the atmosphere's the best, of course. But I've sat pretty much everywhere other than the boxes in the stand, and they all have their own peculiar pleasures. I mean, as I was saying, behind the dugouts, great atmosphere on those terraces. Quite good to be near the away fans. I like to see them suffering. I particularly like it that Rovers cruelly leaves them in the rain and the cold in the windy corner. I've sat in the temporary. Well, I say temporary. I mean, they're not really feeling very temporary, those stands, are they? Where the wind whistles through. And I've sat in the family enclosure, as it's unfortunately called, which has been all right too. But yeah, the Blackthorn. I don't know what it is really called these days, but everybody calls it the Blackthorn. I mean, What else could it be?
Just going back to your writing, have you got anything? You've obviously got something else in the pipeline. Have you done another book in the pipeline? I know you write articles and blogs or whatever, but is there another book on the way?
Yeah, I'm writing a book called The Games, A Global History of the Olympics, and it's a political and cultural history of the Olympic Games, and that's going to be finished, touch wood, fingers crossed, in time to come out for the Rio Games, which are happening next August.
So, research again, does that keep you from coming to Rovers? I mean, you've done a lot.
No, it's an essential
part. Come every game, can you?
No, but it's an essential part of the writing process is to get up here occasionally. Absolutely. No, it's been I've been pretty focused for the last few months, but you've got to get out of the house, man.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.